I am Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until my death in 1953, known for transforming the USSR into a major world power through rapid industrialization and for my role in World War II, but also for my authoritarian rule and the repressive policies that caused immense suffering. Here are some facts about me. My son was so miserable that he couldn't even kill himself. My wife committed suicide after an argument with me. My alcoholic father abused me and my mother. My first wife died after only a year of living together. All facts are truth. I am ashamed of some things, and some things almost destroyed me. However, it is an integral part of my life. It proves that famous people have the same problems and life challenges as everyone else. Now all about it in more detail. Section 1. My alcoholic father abused me and my mother. Childhood, a time meant for innocence and discovery, but for me, it was a crucible of pain. My early years were not a sanctuary of learning and laughter, but a battlefield. The enemy was not foreign or distant, it was my own blood, my own father. My father, Bessarion Jugashvili, was a cobbler in Gori, Georgia. By trade, he mended shoes, but at home, his soul seemed mended by nothing. Bessarion, or Besso, as people called him, was a man consumed by drink and bitterness. His anger erupted unpredictably, and his fists followed with little provocation. His cruelty knew no bounds, leaving scars both physical and emotional on my mother, my small frame, and our home. For my mother, Ketavan Kiki Jalad's life was a ceaseless struggle to shield me from his wrath. She endured more than I can describe, often standing between him and me, her small body serving as a fragile barrier against his unrelenting fury. Her strength, though quiet and selfless, was my earliest memory of resilience. It was she who, against all odds, gave me the will to rise above despair. There was no moment that defined my childhood as much as the nights Besso would stagger home, drunk and belligerent. On one such night, I remember his rage exploding into violence. He struck me across the face so hard that I fell, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. I was only a boy, but I felt something shift inside me, a resolve to never let anyone have such power over me again. From that moment, the idea of dominance, control, and survival became central to my being. Besso's abuse didn't just hurt physically, it also broke the fragile bonds of trust that might have existed between a child and a parent. He didn't merely wield violence, he infused our home with fear. His anger extended beyond fists and words. He sold the little comforts we had, drank away our meager earnings, and left my mother and me to scrape together a life from the barest resources. But Kiki refused to let his destruction define my future. Despite our poverty, she ensured that I had an education. She was deeply religious and believed that I was destined for greater things. She worked tirelessly, sometimes taking in washing or cleaning, to ensure I could attend the local church school. There, I excelled, learning to read and write. My mother often said, "You will become something great, my so-so." Her belief in me was a small light in the darkness of those years. As for Besso, his downward spiral continued. Eventually, he abandoned us altogether, leaving us to fend for ourselves. Though his departure was a relief in many ways, it left us in dire poverty. Yet it was also an opportunity, a chance for my mother and me to rebuild our lives without his oppressive shadow looming over us. Education became my escape. At the church school, I excelled in subjects like theology and poetry. I was particularly drawn to stories of heroes and revolutionaries, individuals who rose above their circumstances to change the world. Perhaps it was a subconscious reaction to my father's tyranny, an urge to fight against the forces that sought to control or suppress me. But the wounds left by Besso were not easily healed. His cruelty shaped my worldview. It taught me that power could be both a weapon and a shield. It instilled in me a deep mistrust of others, a belief that vulnerability was dangerous and trust could be weaponized against you. These lessons would stay with me for the rest of my life, influencing decisions that would echo far beyond my personal existence. I often think about what might have been, had Besso been a kinderman. If he had been a loving father, would I have grown into someone different? Would I have carried less anger, less need to dominate and control? These are questions that linger in my mind, but I know they have no answer. Life, as I have learned, is not built on what-ifs. It is built on the choices we make within the confines of what we are given. The years of my youth were marked by struggle, not only with my father's tyranny but with the harsh realities of poverty and survival. Yet, they were also years of learning, of observing human nature, and of beginning to understand the structures of power that governed the world around me. When people look at the man I became, they often focus on the power I held and the choices I made. Few consider the boy I was, the boy forged in the fires of a brutal household. My father's fists may have beaten me, but they also steeled me. His abandonment may have left us destitute, but it also forced me to find strength within myself and my mother's unwavering resolve. The lessons I learned in those formative years were harsh, but they were also indelible. They taught me that survival depends on strength, that trust is a risk, and that control is the only true security. I do not say this to excuse what I became or the choices I made later in life, but to explain them. My childhood shaped me in ways I am still coming to understand, even now. So when you judge me, as history undoubtedly will, remember this: even the hardest steel is forged in the hottest fire. My fire was my father, my childhood, and the struggles that marked every step of my early years. They shaped me into a fortress, unyielding, self-reliant, and, at times, impenetrable. But like any fortress, the cracks of my youth still run deep within its walls, a reminder that even the strongest among us are shaped by the wounds we carry. Section 2. My first wife died after only a year of living together. There was a time, long ago, when I was not the man history remembers. I was not the hardened figure of resolve and unrelenting will. Once, I laughed freely, loved deeply, and allowed the world to touch my heart. That was before the shadows consumed me. Before Cato left me. Ekaterina Svanidze, or Cato, as everyone called her, was my first wife. She was not only my partner but also my sanctuary. Born into a modest Georgian family, she embodied all that was good and pure in a world often tainted by ambition and brutality. Her presence was a reprieve from the struggles of revolution and the relentless pursuit of ideals that defined my life at the time. We married in 1906, in the midst of political chaos. I was already deeply entrenched in the revolutionary underground, organizing workers and evading the authorities. Our lives were marked by poverty and uncertainty, yet Cato's love brought warmth and stability. For the brief time we shared, she offered me something I had never truly known: peace. But life is rarely kind to those who dare to hope for happiness. In 1907, typhus struck. It came swiftly, and there was little we could do. Medicine was scarce, and her condition worsened rapidly. I watched helplessly as the illness drained the life from her, her once bright eyes dimming with each passing day. She died that same year, just a year after our wedding. I remember her funeral vividly. She was buried in Tiflis, modern-day Tbilisi, in a small cemetery where the air was heavy with grief. I stood by her grave, surrounded by friends and family, unable to cry. I was numb, shattered by a loss that words could not describe. They say I whispered something that day, something that has followed me like an echo ever since: this creature softened my heart of stone. When she died, all that remained was stone. I cannot confirm if I said those exact words, but the sentiment was true. Cato had been the only person to reach the softer, more human side of me, a side I buried with her. Her death marked a turning point in my life. Grief has a way of transforming people, and for me, it solidified a resolve I didn't know I possessed. Some say I became colder, more ruthless. Perhaps they are right. When you lose the person who anchors you, the person who reminds you of the value of love and gentleness, it becomes easier to turn away from those ideals altogether. Cato and I had a son, Yakov, who was only an infant when she died. I struggled to care for him, torn as I was between my revolutionary activities and the demands of fatherhood. In truth, I was ill-equipped to raise a child alone. I entrusted Yakov to the care of Cato's family, believing they could provide him with the stability I could not. My relationship with Yakov remained strained throughout his life, a testament to the emotional toll of losing Cato. Her death left a scar on my soul, one that never truly healed. It shaped the way I viewed the world and the people in it. I became more focused on my work, pouring my grief into the revolutionary cause. I convinced myself that personal attachments were a weakness, a distraction from the larger battles I needed to fight. When people speak of my unyielding resolve, my capacity for ruthlessness, they rarely understand the personal loss that forged those traits. It was not ambition alone that drove me, it was pain. Losing Cato stripped away my ability to trust in the gentler aspects of life. Love became a distant memory, replaced by a singular focus on survival and control. In later years, as my power grew, I often thought of her. Would she have recognized the man I became? Would she have understood the choices I made, the sacrifices I justified in the name of ideology? I do not know. What I do know is that she was my heart, my humanity. And when she died, she took those pieces of me with her. Cato, my dearest Cato, you were my light in a dark and unforgiving world. Your absence left me hollow, a man of ambition but without the warmth to temper it. If there is one truth I can offer to history, it is this: before I became who I am, I loved deeply. And in losing you, I lost the part of myself that might have been kind. Section 3. My son was so miserable that he couldn't even kill himself. Yaakov. My Yaakov. He was my firstborn, my flesh and blood, the son of my youth, and a living connection to Cato, his mother, who left us both far too soon. When I think of him, it is in moments of solitude, away from the weight of power and the judgment of history. Because in the quiet of those moments, I confront a truth that I rarely speak aloud: I failed him. As a father, I failed him deeply. Yaakov was born in 1907, mere months before Cato's death. Her passing left an indelible mark on both of us. I, consumed by grief and revolutionary fervor, threw myself into my work, leaving little time for the child she had left behind. He was sent to live with Cato's family, who cared for him in the early years of his life while I continued to evade the authorities and pursue my political goals. It was not the upbringing of a boy who might one day need a father's love, but it was the only path I knew. As Yaakov grew, so did the distance between us, not just physical but emotional. He was not like me. He was soft-spoken, gentle, introspective, a contrast to the hardened, unyielding persona I had cultivated out of necessity. I interpreted these traits as weaknesses in a world I believed to be ruthless. My love for Yaakov was real, but it was expressed in the form of demands and expectations. I believed that harshness would prepare him for the trials of life. The cracks in our relationship became evident as he matured. In his late teens, he fell in love with a Jewish girl named Zinaida, and they planned to marry. I disapproved, seeing it as a distraction for a young man who needed to focus on discipline and strength. When their relationship ended, Yaakov was devastated. In his despair, he attempted to take his own life, shooting himself in the chest. By some twist of fate, he survived. When I was informed of the incident, I made a remark that would haunt me for years: he can't even shoot straight. It was said in anger, in frustration, perhaps even in fear. I had no time for vulnerability, not even my son's. But those words were cruel, and they left a scar. I told myself that such callousness was necessary to instill resilience, but I see now that it only deepened his isolation. As Yaakov entered adulthood, our relationship remained strained. He joined the Red Army, seeking his own path and perhaps an escape from the shadow I cast over his life. Then came the Second World War, a conflict that would consume millions of lives, including his. In 1941, during the Battle of Smolensk, Yaakov was captured by the Germans. He became a prisoner of war, held at a camp alongside thousands of others. The Germans, recognizing his significance as my son, attempted to use him as a bargaining chip. They offered to exchange Yaakov for a German officer, Friedrich Paulus, who had been captured after the Battle of Stalingrad. I refused. The decision was not an easy one, but it was clear in my mind. To trade Yaakov for a German officer would have undermined the principles of equality and sacrifice that I demanded of the Soviet people. Millions of Soviet soldiers had died, their families enduring unimaginable grief. How could I justify treating my son's life as more valuable than theirs? I convinced myself that this was the right choice, the only choice. But it was a choice that tore at my soul. Yakov's captivity ended in tragedy. In 1943, he died in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. The official account claims that he threw himself against an electrified fence, choosing death over the humiliation of captivity. Whether this is true, I cannot say for certain. What I do know is that I lost my son, a loss I cannot blame entirely on war or circumstance. I was a part of it, from the beginning. For all my power, for all my influence over nations and history, I could not save him. Worse, I did not save him. The bond between father and son, already fragile, was tested by the choices I made as a leader and as a man. And I failed. The world knows me as Stalin, the architect of victories, the leader of the Soviet Union, the man who shaped an era. But in the quiet moments, when the titles and the accolades fall away, I am only a father. A father who lost his son. A father who wonders if things might have been different, had he been less hardened, less distant, less consumed by the pursuit of power and ideals. History will judge me as it sees fit. Perhaps it will focus on my successes, or perhaps it will condemn my failures. But tonight, as I think of Yakov, I judge myself not as a leader but as a father. And by that measure, there is no redemption for me. Section 4. My wife committed suicide after an argument with me. Nadezhda Alolayeva, Nadia. She was not just my wife, she was my equal in many ways, the daughter of revolutionaries who shared my commitment to the cause and my disdain for the old world. But she was also her own person, fiercely independent, deeply intelligent, and unafraid to voice her opinions, no matter how sharp or unwelcome they might be. Perhaps that is what drew me to her in the first place, her strength, her audacity to challenge me in ways no one else dared. We married in 1919. She was just 18 years old, a young woman stepping into a world of revolution and turmoil, while I was already a hardened Bolshevik, nearly 20 years her senior. Ours was a union of passion and politics, born in the crucible of upheaval. For a time, there was happiness. We shared moments of tenderness, and she bore me 2 children, Vasily in 1921 and Svetlana in 1926. But the life we built was not one of domestic bliss, it was a life shaped by the demands of the revolution and the heavy burdens of power. Nadia was no mere figurehead in my life. She worked alongside me, initially as a typist and later as a member of the Communist Party. She was educated, driven, and deeply committed to the ideals of socialism. Yet, as the years passed, the weight of our lives began to take its toll. My work consumed me, pulling me deeper into the machinery of the state, while she struggled with her role as my wife and the constraints it imposed. Our relationship began to deteriorate in the 1920s. Nadia's health, both physical and mental, was fragile. She suffered from chronic migraines and bouts of depression, conditions exacerbated by the pressure of being Stalin's wife. She had ambitions of her own, dreams of contributing to the revolution in ways that went beyond the confines of the Kremlin. But those ambitions often clashed with the reality of life at my side, a life filled with suspicion, isolation, and the unrelenting scrutiny of the party. The final years of her life were marked by growing tension between us. Nadia was critical of the policies I implemented during the first five-year plan, particularly the forced collectivization of agriculture and the brutal methods used to suppress dissent. She spoke out against the suffering she witnessed, voicing concerns that few dared to express in my presence. These arguments were not the disagreements of a husband and wife, they were clashes of ideology and principle, fueled by her sense of justice and my determination to maintain control. The events of November 8, 1932, remain etched in my memory. It was the night of a banquet held in honor of the 15th anniversary of the October Revolution. Nadia and I argued openly during the gathering, a rare public display of discord that shocked those present. She accused me of cruelty, of being disconnected from the suffering of the people. I dismissed her concerns, mocking her in front of our comrades. It was a moment of humiliation for her, one I regret deeply. Later that evening, she retreated to her room. I did not follow. I was too proud, too consumed by my own anger and the demands of the state to consider the depth of her despair. When they found her the next morning, she was dead, a pistol by her side. The official report stated it was suicide, though rumors and conspiracies would swirl around her death for decades. In the days that followed, I buried my grief beneath a mask of composure. To the world, I remained Stalin, the unyielding leader of the Soviet Union. But inside, I was shattered. Nadia's death was a wound that never healed. She was the one person who had seen through the layers of my persona, who had dared to confront the man behind the power. And in the end, I had driven her away. Our children, Vasily and Svetlana, bore the weight of her loss in their own ways. Vasily became reckless, struggling with alcoholism and the expectations placed upon him as my son. Svetlana, too, carried the scars of her mother's absence, seeking love and stability in a life overshadowed by her father's legacy. I see her pain, even now, and I know it is another consequence of my failings. History will remember me as a leader, a tyrant, a man who reshaped the Soviet Union through sheer force of will. But history will not see the moments of doubt, the nights spent haunted by the faces of those I loved and lost. Nadia's death is a burden I carry alone, a reminder that even the most powerful are not immune to the consequences of their actions. When I think of her now, it is not as a critic or an adversary but as the woman who once believed in me, who saw the potential for goodness beneath the armor of ambition. I failed her in life, and her death is a testament to that failure. It is a truth I cannot escape, no matter how many victories I achieve or how many statues are built in my name.